Well, I am Sarah Hendrix, and I have gone through mold and in my house, and as a client and as a consumer trying to understand the mold world, I have partnered with Eric, who knows all things about mold, it seems like, and just gonna have a conversation about, as just a normal person, what do we do when our houses have a leak? And you suspect it's mold, or maybe that your family is not feeling well. We're just going to be talking about that today, and just the basics about, yeah, what to do. So thank
But
you, Eric. Eric, share a little bit about you.
okay, I will. My name is Eric Althouse. I'm an indoor air quality professional, and I have a laboratory called Analytics Global. I've been working in the indoor environmental world for over 30 years. And so I've seen a lot of things. I've done a lot of testing. We've invented some new systems. So we have lots of experience, and I'd love to share with you some of the experience, and maybe we can help some of our listeners figure out what to do in a practical way.
I love it. You've been so helpful in my journey, and I do want to say, like, as as someone who just didn't know anything about mold and then going through this experience, how helpful it is to have someone who understands this world to guide you, because it can be so confusing. And I found that it's really hard to find good information that isn't trying to sell you something,
Right.
or in the mold industry, it seems really hard to find mold experts that agree or even understand mycotoxins. And I came up with a lot of people not understanding that. So I'm really excited to have you. And I apologize, someone's revving up the engines outside. So hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, I hear you great.
Okay.
The thing that I try to do is bring it back to science. When scientists disagree, the way they argue about their opinions is they come up with experiments, and then they do these experiments and then submit them for peer review, and then if they're accepted, they'll be published in a journal, and so that's a peer reviewed science. That's what I like to rely on. So we all have these ideas about the right things to do, different things, but it's best to rely on what's been tried and true and proven scientifically. And so that's what I try to come back to. So I hope I'm giving people good advice, because I can usually point to a paper that explains what I'm doing.
Mhm. Yeah. And that's been so helpful for me too, to come back to like the science-based evidence, and it makes me feel like I have a trusted resource.
Well, it's when people deal with a mold problem, it's people, they don't understand, their family members and their friends don't understand how devastating it is and how
Mhm.
problematic it is. And I've heard all kinds of stories that are tragic, and people think that they're crazy.
Yeah.
And it's real hard to know if you really are experiencing something that might be affecting you in your house. In fact, if somebody has a lot of mold in their house, I would rather them have a fire in their home, because
Mm-hmm.
at least people are sympathetic when there's a fire. They sort of rally around that person. When
Yeah.
a person has a water event or they have mold growth in their house, they don't get that same sympathy, unfortunately.
That's
And
so true.
insurance tries to deny you, where you wouldn't have those problems if it was a fire. I wish we
Mm,
could just change the mindset of this mold, because it is so common, is more common than fires.
yeah. That resonates so much with my experience and going around and everyone telling me I'm crazy. And even people who did remediation were telling me like it's not that big of a deal. Here, I'll open up a wall in front of you and show you. Um, yeah, it's
Well,
been really devastating.
the World Health Organization calls mold and mycotoxin exposures the Great Masquerader. And what they
Hmm.
mean by that is that the symptoms of these uh, mold molds and their associated mycotoxins that we'll probably talk about in another chat, they cause a variety of health symptoms that can mimic other diseases. So it's hard to know if it's something else or if it's
Hmm.
if it's related to mold. So the smart thing to do is figure out if you have a problem and remediate it, whether you think it's the issue or not. And within months, I find that most people get better after they get rid of the source.
Gotcha. So then, like, how would you start? You start right away with like, like I have water damage in my
Mm.
house. Yeah, just going straight to remediation. Do you think you have to like, would it be smart if you have any leak in your house to test it to see what you're dealing with, or do you just remediate right away? Or I don't
Well,
know, like,
okay, so there's some processes. I guess it depends on the scenario. So if you have a hurricane or you have a pipe break and you know that you have a water leak, you have one scenario that you go through. And in that scenario, time is of the essence. You have a mitigate, you have an obligation under your insurance policy for your
mm,
house to mitigate damage. So that means you want to get people in to first turn off the water.
mm,
If you can stop a leak, you want to stop that
yeah,
first. If you have a hurricane and the roof blew off, you want to put a temporary roof on. You got to stop the water. That's step number one. Then you want to extract the water. So that means you want to suck all the water out that you can. And then there's no need trying to salvage things that don't need to be salvaged. um, Lots of companies, restoration companies, the first thing they come out and try to do is rent dehumidifiers and fans, which
mm,
sounds like a good idea, but it gets
mm-hmm,
very expensive. And so the thing that's really smarter is first protect the air conditioning, the HVAC system, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, seal off those vents, and then start taking out things that are going to get thrown away anyway. So porous materials that get wet and stay wet for 48 hours need to get thrown away. And examples of that would be sheetrock, fiberglass insulation, carpeting, maybe ceiling tiles, things like that. They're going in the garbage. You
mm,
don't try to dry those out and salvage them when they've been wet for more than 48 hours, or if they've been wetted by a hurricane rain. Those are considered contaminated right from the start.
mm,
Or if they've been contaminated by what I'll call black water. Black water is something that comes below the trap of a toilet, dark water that you don't want in your house. If that touches anything, you don't try to clean it. If it's porous, you throw it away. Then once you're down to non-porous materials, then you can start the drying. That's when it makes sense. And then you try to dry the hardest thing, which is the concrete. The when you're done, the concrete on the floor should be dry. The hardest materials to dry is what you target with moisture meters and so forth to see if you're done with
gotcha.
drying. So you just don't let people come out and set their equipment and run equipment as long as they want. They're either going to dry it too much and charge you way too much, or they're not going to dry enough and put it all back together when it's still damp. Concrete can look dry, but still be damp. So you want to make sure that it's completely dry. And there's techniques that we'll talk about at some point of how to tell if those materials are dry or not at the end of a job.
Gotcha. So if you had water damage and you didn't catch it within that window, like how quickly can it spread? Then are you talking like like if it's a wall, you would just have to keep tearing open to find out how far the water damage goes at that point?
Yes. If you can get to it within 48 hours, you won't have a problem. If you can dry things very fast, that's the key. That's what you really want to do. Extract the water and dry it. If you can get it all done within 48 hours, beautiful. That's a great thing. If you can't, then like you said, you start peeling the onion back and seeing how far the damage goes and just keep working at it until you get everything exposed and that can be dried. So at the end of the day, all the porous materials come out. Things that are semi-porous, like the wood studs in a wall, they get cleaned, maybe sanded if they're moldy, vacuumed, and so forth. You clean up the area, and then you dry all that stuff out and put it back together. And you may need to contact your insurance company if if that's if you have insurance and that's a concern, you might contact them. And there's
Okay.
some keys with that that maybe we should talk about.
Definitely, because I think that part is very confusing too about how to verbalize things, if it can be covered at all. Yeah, I'd love to talk
Yeah,
about that in the
most
future.
insurance policies have an exclusion for mold.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And what that means is there's a cap on how much mold damage you can claim. In lots of states, it's somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000. And the damage for a big water event that floods your house can be a lot more.
Right.
So it's important to know your policy and to articulate things properly. The last thing I do when I talk to my insurance company is tell them that I have a mold growth problem, because
Hmm.
it gives them an excuse automatically to deny your claim. So what I refer to is water water damage. Water
Okay.
damage is covered by policies, and you can, there's sometimes there's options in your insurance to have temporary housing
Hmm.
that you can go while things are being done. But it's important to talk about water damage and focus on that, because mold is just one of the many symptoms of water damage. So when you get rid of the water damage, you're getting rid of the mold. So that's
Sure.
the way to
Okay.
handle that.
Okay. That makes sense.
And you got to keep in mind your your deductible. A lot of
Sure.
times it's not worth even contacting your insurance company, depending on
True.
how big the problem is. But it is an option. That's why you have insurance.
Okay.
So those are
That's
some
great.
beginning starts if you have a major water event in your house.
What about and stop me if this is like too off topic, but like what about prior water damage? Maybe if you like come into a home and you suspect it, like will it just dry up if the water
Mm.
has been stopped but there was a leak? Do you still have to go do that remediation for something that was in the past? Or is it like
Mm.
is it good? How does
Oh,
that work?
that's a good question. Most people think that they can dry up mold, they can wipe with some bleach, and everything's golden.
Yeah.
The problem is the wall cavities. Inside of a wall cavity, you can have lots of mold growing, and and even if it's dry, mold can still be a hazard. So we've done studies where basically, if mold is inside of a wall cavity, it doesn't eliminate the mold exposure. It reduces it somewhere about 50%.
Mm.
So if you had 1 square foot of mold inside the house, inside the wall, the exposure would be like you had 2 square feet. The mold still makes its way out of those walls, but it sort of slows it down. But it's still going
Hmm.
to get out. It comes out through air pathways. It's driven on air pressure differentials. So there's always winds and pressures that happen. So wind will blow against the house, and this mold will come out, and the pieces and parts of mold will come out, and they'll go into the house, and people will get exposed to that.
Hmm.
Now, if it's inside of a wall cavity, um, and it's dry, it's still a problem. Even if you put chemicals on this stuff, you might even kill the mold where it won't grow again, but the pieces can still cause people problems. A lot of the things that hurt you aren't alive in the first place. So it's kind of a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And so can it like come out through vents then, or would it can it come through the wall? Like I know that
Yeah.
mycotoxins are so small, right? Like
Yeah. So these
okay.
particles, um, we've been talking about mycotoxins. I probably should define that. MYCO means mold, and toxin is obviously a toxin. And so these are chemicals that certain molds produce under certain conditions. And so these toxins are very potent, and they're very small. They're smaller than the spores. If the spores they're sort of like seeds for the mold, and they're everywhere. There's lots of spores blowing around all the time. And so that's not uncommon. If a person calls me up and they say, "Do I have mold in my house?" I know the answer is going to be yes. The answer is always yes. You always have mold in your house. The real question that they're trying to ask me is, do I have mold growing in my house? And
Mm,
so hidden mold is the problem. But these mycotoxins are very small. They make their way out of the wall cavities through pressure differentials. And you would think that the house is super tight and that air can't come in. But if it were
mm.
that way, you would suffocate to death.
Yeah.
Your house is not as tight as you think it is. And so air moves in and out of these walls, and this stuff gets into the air. Some of it blows outside, some of it gets breathed in, and some of it settles out in the dust where it can be breathed over and over again.
Mm,
So these are the problems. Uh, but the mycotoxins are just one of the ways that molds can hurt you. There's really three ways that molds can hurt a person.
yeah.
Number one is allergy and asthma triggers. And almost every mold will affect someone in the world.
Wow.
Uh, a lot of 1 out of 3 of us will have allergies. Lots of kids have asthma. Mold's a major asthma trigger. 1 out of 13 kids in the United States have asthma. So
Mm,
asthma can be a very serious disease. It can be life threatening for a few. And so mold exposure is not a good thing. So the first way is allergy asthma triggers. The second way molds can hurt you is infection. And most of us, we get exposed to mold all the time. We don't have a problem with infections. But if our immunity gets down for whatever reason, let's say you're undergoing chemotherapy or some other cause, you can be at a great risk for fungal infection, mold infections. And so the mold actually sets up housekeeping on your body or in your body. And
mm,
so that's a fungal infection. And some of these, like aspergillosis, is a very, very serious disease that can even cause death. So certain molds species can cause big problems. And so that's the second way. The third way molds can hurt you is not that well understood. It's the toxic effects. I mentioned the mycotoxins. Lots of molds can cause problems with this toxin approach. Basically, you get exposed over time, and a lot of these can accumulate somewhat in the body, and they can cause major problems. That they're mysterious problems. Lots of them. They can be hair loss and all kinds of skin
mhm,
issues, respiratory issues, headaches, and hearing loss,
mm.
uh, even uh, neurological problems. I mean, it's amazing the symptoms that can be caused by mold.
Yeah, it
So,
sounds like it.
mhm.
Yeah, and I think I hear more and more about all these people who are experiencing these different things, and it's hard to like pinpoint. And I think that's what makes it so confusing is like, is it mold? Is it not mold? And like you're saying, like it can masquerade as all these different symptoms. It's not like really clean cut. That this is it, it will be mold if you experience this, this, and this. So I think it's helpful knowing those three things and how many people that have asthma or that growing up in my family had asthma. And I'm now wondering, was it mold? So I'm grateful that we have this
Well,
information.
some of these molds, like Alternaria alternata, is a very common mold, and it's a mold that's found across the United States and around the world,
Mm,
and it actually will trigger adult onset asthma according to the
really
research. So a person can get asthma from mold exposure. So
interesting.
I'm not a medical doctor, but I would encourage anyone that has questions about those things to see their medical professional and raise the question. But
Mhm.
the key thing that most medical professionals will tell you is that if you're continually getting exposed, uh, you're only treating symptoms. So it's important to get to the root of the problem and get the mold taken care of in your house. And sometimes easier said than done.
Definitely. Oh my gosh. I think about my journey of like it was like a year of like health decline. And they're like, is it autoimmune? And I had never experienced asthma, but until the pandemic, and I'm locked in my house, spending every second inside. And I thought it was maybe COVID or something, but experiencing adult onset asthma and then migraines every day, so stuffed up that I couldn't breathe in my own house. But it would get better if I left the house. And I think that's an interesting,
Oh yeah.
um, thing to notice. Like, does it get better when you leave this environment and then come back? And I couldn't understand why that was happening until it makes so much sense when you say, oh, it's environmental, oh, it's mold. But when you're in it, it can be confusing. And then ending with that's when I found you, is like losing hearing in one ear, the sudden hearing loss, was like a really big like eye opener of like something is so wrong and my doctor cannot figure it out because all my panels looked normal. And yeah, it's just wild to feel that experience. And now I'm so grateful that for me, I was able to do one of your dust tests at home, and it helped at least give all these pictures that I didn't know that was part of the puzzle. And you were so helpful in explaining to me, like, well, this mycotoxin is directly related to hearing loss, or this one to asthma. So yeah, it's
Mm,
so helpful to know
I'm so
that.
glad we could help you out.
I mean,
I mean,
I'm too.
hopefully we can help other people out through your experience, and it won't
Hmm.
be for nothing. Well,
Yeah.
so I think one of the things that people ask me a lot is, what do I do when I suspect a problem and I don't see anything? There wasn't a
Yes.
major water leak.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned earlier, sometimes you have a house, either you bought it from somebody else,
Hmm.
or you're renting a house, or maybe you have your own
Yeah.
house that you built, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden it starts, something doesn't seem right, you seem affected. And that's when it's good to go through an evaluation process. um, Sometime we'll talk about different testing methodologies of how these can be tested, but some of the things can be tested yourself, and and we can show some of those with, maybe in another time we can
Yeah.
have another discussion about that. The other thing you can do is hire a consultant. Lots of consultants are out there, and a lot of them are really good. We call them indoor environmental professionals, and they specialize in looking for problems. They're basically inspectors that look for indoor air quality problems or mold problems, and they look through your house and try to find things. Good ones will look for other things other than mold. Mold's not the cause of every health symptom in the world. Uh, for instance, probably the most serious thing a person could have is carbon monoxide poisoning,
Mm.
uh, which happens when any sort of natural fuel is burned incompletely. It can form this CO, carbon monoxide gas, and it's invisible. It's an invisible killer. You can't see it, smell it, or taste it, and yet people can get sick from it. They can even get brain damage. Before, we all know it can kill you, but
Mhm.
if it doesn't kill you on the way there, it might cause brain damage, or
Mm.
the common symptoms are things like headaches and nausea, flu-like symptoms.
Mm.
So I always encourage people to rule out the things like carbon monoxide. If you're burning, if you have natural gas in your house and you're burning that, for instance, you want to have a carbon monoxide detector that you can buy at any home store. They're not that expensive. You definitely need that combined with your smoke detector, keep the batteries changed. So that's just a thing that is unrelated to mold, but you want to do. And so indoor environmental professionals should be looking for things like carbon monoxide and formaldehyde. Um, the main thing that they want to look for related to mold is moisture damage.
Mm.
So you want to go through the house and look for signs of water damage. And most consultants will have tools like moisture meters and infrared cameras. I'll show you
Mm.
those another time, but you can go through a house and try to find damage that way. And then there's some testing. There's testing that consultants do, and there's some very sophisticated testing that we offer that a person can do themselves. And so I think that's a great tool as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't tell you how many, like, now I'm a part of all of these, like, um forums and groups on Facebook, even of like the mold community is growing, and they share pictures back and forth like, is this mold, is this mold? And can you even tell from a photo, or you have to be on site and have a professional come to test it? Because they're posting all these pictures, and yeah, like it looks like mold. And is all mold dangerous? Is some of it okay?
Well, all mold growing in your house is unacceptable. So I would say it's something that you don't want. It's either, if it's not hurting you, it may be hurting your house. Molds,
Mm.
their natural function in the environment is to break down leaves, and they're breaking down building materials like sheetrock and things like that you want in your house.
Yep.
So you want to stop the mold growth. And the way you stop the mold growth is turn off the water to it. You've got to stop the moisture problem,
Mhm.
and you can stop that. But yeah, they all the molds that you have in your house, you want to get rid of, and
Okay.
you want a clean, dry house. Ultimately, that's with no mold growing.
Mhm.
That's the ultimate.
It's surprising how hard that is to ask for these days. I feel like it's so many of the people I talk to now are like, oh yeah, like had water damage here or I had mold there. It's becoming a lot more maybe common, or maybe it's just people are becoming more aware of the health effects, and they weren't as educated before. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for people like you who are sharing this information so that we can be more educated in our homes and our environment and be educated consumers of the products that we buy.
Well, it's so common. I know you shared a resource with me one time. What did it say? It was It was something. I think it was from the
Oh
EPA or
yeah,
something.
EPA was like 80% of houses that they tested in their study had water damage. And as you're saying, like water damage um is so prevalent that I don't know. I don't, maybe you would know better. Does that mean 80% of those buildings, if they've had water damage, does that always mean mold, or like, I don't know, but the thought there is like everything has been touched almost. As very little has been untouched by water damage.
Well, I've seen lots of studies. Somewhere, I think the lowest numbers I see are something like 30% of the houses have mold growing in them.
Mm,
So it's a big number. Even
yeah.
at the least, it's a big number. And
Yeah.
it's probably the majority of houses have mold damage if a person knows where to look and how to check
Mhm.
and so forth. So it's a big problem. It's ubiquitous. So
Right.
we've got our work cut out for us to educate
Yeah,
on all this.
totally. And do you want to share a little bit about the test that you offer, and um yeah, like how to do that and what you would find with that information?
Well, we have two major tests that people can do themselves. These are wipers, and basically the two tests. One is the mycotoxin test, and we have different categories of mycotoxin testing that you can do, and we also have one. It's called a mold DNA screen, and it checks for 45 different species of mold. And basically, these tests are pretty easy to do. These are the kits right here, and they're basically the same method for both tests. The myco wipe is used for mycotoxin, and it comes with a pair of gloves and this foil packed wiper. And so it's real simple. You put on the gloves, you go through the house, and you wipe some dust up from horizontal surfaces wherever it's settled, and then you basically all it after you get the gloves on, you just tear open this foil pack inside, and you use that wiper to wipe things. You throw the foil pack away. Here's one right here. It's just a foil pack. You tear open. You get this wiper out. Now I would wear gloves if I were doing this, so I didn't get the mycotoxins all over my hands if there were any present. But that's the myco wipe, and you put it when you get done. You put it in this transport that has a serial number on it. Looks like this. Each one has a unique serial number, and you basically put it back in this baggie, tape, push all the air out of it, and seal it back to us. And then similarly, we've got this wipe. This is the HC45 wipe. This is the mold DNA healthcare panel, 45 species. That's big to say. So we just call it the HC45 for short. Same thing. It's gloves, a wiper. You tear open the package. You wipe some dust from separate surfaces. So if I had a table, the left side I would wipe for mycotox, and the right side I would wipe with HC45. And you put the sample back in the transport, which is a glorified name for a baggie, and send it back to our lab along with the chain of custody form, and we'll know what to do with it from there. But we have the address of where the samples go back in here as well. So these will give you a great deal of information. These are basically like an ERMI sample on steroids. A lot of people have heard about this ERMI testing that the EPA developed. And we'll talk about that sometime, I'm sure. But those two tests are things that you can do yourself. And from those tests, you can tell if your house is very moldy or not. We know from our database, what is normal and what's not. And so from looking at these tests, we can tell you if you have a hidden problems that's suspected. It may be old, may be new, but you more than likely have a problem, and we'll help you. We'll make some recommendations to you how to deal with that, go through the whole remediation and investigation process with you.
So wonderful. And I know since I've done them myself and they're so easy to use, and like it's just so helpful to have a tool that you can be in control of without someone coming into your house and charging whatever that they want for these tests. And I'm really curious because when I did one in my other house that I was living in that definitely had mold, I was so grateful that you called me. You called me so late at night, being so concerned. You were like, get out of that house. I don't know what this would do to a person, but it was just, the levels were off the charts for this old 100-year-old home that we were in. And the thing is I didn't smell anything. I didn't see anything. We knew we had water damage, but the people came and remediated and said it was okay. It's just wild to me that something can be so harmful and your senses are not picking it up. And so I did the mycotoxin panel and it came up. And then we moved it to a new house and did another mycotoxin panel.
Did you feel a difference when you moved out of that house?
Immediately. It was wild.
Yeah.
I was really hoping and praying, and still am, that the sudden hearing loss, that it will just suddenly reverse back, and that the ringing would go away. Because another symptom that I've had and lived with since then is this like ringing in my ear that can be so loud, and for some reason it like changes pitch. If I go into certain areas, that I've found out now that I'm so sensitive to mold, if I go into certain areas, the pitch changes, and
Wow.
I feel like I could be a walking radar for like, yep, there's mold here, don't go here. And I don't understand the mechanics behind all that, but it's just been very helpful. And even redoing or finding water damage in the next place we're at, doing a mycotoxin panel, understanding what has been here too, understanding that I was getting re-triggered in this one room because it was the same mycotoxin as before. And I'm curious, does it ever come back? Have you ever gotten someone's mycotoxin panel back and it did not come up with anything, or are mycotoxins everywhere too?
Oh, it comes up negative all the time.
Really?
We design these tests so a normal house shouldn't have mycotoxins. These mycotoxins are not really blowing around outside. They're produced outside, and the way I explain it is sort of like if you had some arsenic and you dropped it in the ocean, it wouldn't be a big deal. A few drops of arsenic in a great big ocean wouldn't be a big deal. On the other hand, if these molds are in your house, it's a different scenario. So it would be like arsenic dropped in your coffee cup. So molds outside get diluted by the ocean of air outside. And so there's not that great of an exposure. Indoors, you're sealed in a box essentially, And if the mold's growing in there and producing this stuff, it's sort of this scenario of the arsenic in the coffee cup scenario.
Mm,
It's more concentrated. So mycotoxins are produced outside, but they're just not as common outside. Unless sometimes you could live near a swamp, let's say. I've had a couple of clients that had very swampy yards, and they had a mycotoxin problem that was actually blowing in from outside. But that's pretty
really?
rare. Most of the times that doesn't happen. And so mycotoxin and molds in a house can be a concentrated big problem for people.
I'm glad you said that because I think that's another question that I get all the time. And even that my functional medicine doctor just asked me to do was she's like, well, how do you know it's not blowing in from outside? And again, we're all slowly being educated on this. There's not a lot of information that is widely known about this. So I think it's great questions to ask. And um, for mold spores, I know that that was a common thing to do. Even the last people before you that we used for mold testing, they were like they would do inside and outside and then compare the numbers. Is that still relevant? And is that relevant for spores but not for mycotoxins or vice versa?
Well, it can be relevant for spores, but
Okay,
the problem is that type of testing is not reliable. I think maybe
gotcha.
we'll talk more in detail about that one day, but basically,
Yeah.
most consultants use that, and I've used those tests before. But we did an extensive study, and we published on it, and we found no matter how many spore trap hair samples that we collected, it was unreliable. So I don't
Mm,
want to do things that are unreliable. So this mycotoxin test, if you have mycotoxin in your house above the detection limit, I'm going to recommend that you take some actions. Um, the worst case scenario is you clean your house. Most of us probably could use a good spring cleaning of our
oh
house
yeah.
anyway. So I feel like I really can't go wrong in recommending
Mm,
to clean somebody's house, but that will cut the exposure. But houses that don't have water damage in their history won't have mycotoxins from our database.
mm,
We check control houses. We have a wide variety of control houses, so we get houses a lot that don't have any mycotoxin in them at all. And then on the other hand, we have some that have heavy mycotoxin from our screening, and so we don't want to alarm people unnecessarily. So we don't dial in the test as low as we could get it. We don't want background noise. We want,
mm,
if we give somebody a positive result, we want them to have confidence that if they keep looking, they're going to find the hidden mold growth and
mm.
and the water damage.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
yes.
And I know it's been so helpful for us. Once we went to looking, yeah, it was hard to find, but we found it. So
Oh,
that's
that's
such a
good.
great such a great tool to have.
Yeah. Well, it's been great to talk to you today.
Yes, thank you so much for chatting. And I would love to continue these conversations. I feel like I have so many questions, you have so much to share, and hopefully we'll just make this a series of conversations back and forth, and maybe other people can submit their questions in the future and
Yeah.
ask an expert. So
Well,
thank you
let's
so
talk about
much.
it. And if people have comments, let's have a friendly debate about things. If they
Yeah.
don't agree with me, let's seek out the literature and find an
Right.
answer. We're all seeking the same thing,
Mhm.
wellness and
Mhm.
truth. So
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Eric. I so
thank you,
appreciate
Sarah. It's
you.
such a privilege to talk to you.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to our next conversation.
Until next
Okay.
time.
Okay. Bye.